Today, I'm up over $120,000 in the trading day, and this right here is the exact take I took. It was a 1-minute bearish BPR violation, but before we go into this trade, let's talk about our bias, let's talk about our execution, and let's talk about what made me think and going long where I did. So, bias. Coming into the open, today was a pretty hard day off the open. In terms of gauging bias through a higher time frame, pretty difficult because if you look at recency price, it's been very up and down, very consolidative in terms of price action, where we just have not done much. On the hourly time frame here specifically, we're just trading up and down, and we're not seeing much of movement at all. But what we're able to gauge, obviously, with our components is we have 3 components in identifying my bias. If you haven't seen my YouTube video on exactly how I talk about that, go ahead and watch that video after this. But with this here specifically, on the hourly time frame for today's example, again, very tough. Same thing with the 4-hour time frame, same thing with the daily time frame. Not much to operate. But for me, what I simply did is, although we didn't have a clear higher time frame look, I used the other 2 components, which was overnight price and the opening range move. Well, if you go down here and you look at our overnight price, we end up seeing price essentially create a bullish sequence, quite of a slow one, but we see a bullish open through Asia, and then we see continuation onwards for the most part coming into New York open. What does New York open do? Well, we essentially see price off the open create a bullish opening range move. Now, NQ off the open ends up coming down here, and we end up taking out this London low, which we then sweep up and come back off of, right? That is a bullish sequence. But what ES ends up doing here off the open is ES actually ends up creating a higher low, which also creates bullish SMT. ES created a bullish SMT by creating a higher low here, whilst NQ created a lower low past that London low. So bullish SMT paired up with the overnight sequence trading for the most part bullish, and then you end up seeing the opening range move trade bullish. My bias was sitting higher naturally. Now at this point in time, my higher time frame outlook wasn't still very clear, but I like the idea behind higher price because of the fact that price off the opening range move was bullish, price off overnight price was bullish. Now, after seeing price trade the way it did off the open, I wasn't necessarily too entertained in trading upside yet, although I had 2 out of the 3 components. I specifically more so wanted higher time frames to clear up a bit. I talked about that today on my live stream. The first piece I ended up posting out for today is I said open bullish SMT wiped, or this is after, our bullish SMT got wiped. Open bullish SMT got wiped, NQ leading the sell, ES lagging the reaction. On the London low for ES will determine what we do. In Gulf Pass, I expect NQ to run Asia lows. Reverse, I expect a move back into its range. So essentially, looking at price here, after the open that we had and having the bias that I had, right, again, it wasn't A+ because we didn't have a clear higher time frame look. However, we did have the other 2 components swaying towards upside. We end up seeing price essentially come back down here, and we see a tremendous sell, which was obviously significantly more than what the buy sequence was. So at this point in time, I'm like, okay, I have an unclear picture on price because at this point, I'm bullish, but price is printing bearish. So for me, I'm telling chat, I'm on live, I'm like, okay, yo, chat, if we see price trade past this on a low, we most likely engulf into Asia lows for NQ. And I said that knowing that price was most likely to do that, even though I had a bullish picture in my mind earlier on. And I think this is important for you guys watching this video and for traders watching this video, that even Lanto, even the best traders in the world that are way better than me, you have your moments where sometimes the charts don't make sense. And I think it's completely normal to think, that it's fine that, whenever that happens, because I said this a couple minutes ago before I started up the review, but as the great thing about scalpers, the great thing about the system that I follow is I only need to know what the markets want to do or are going to do or try to predict it when I need to put risk on. And when I put risk on is simply following my model and when all my components line up. Were our components lined up here? No. We had a bias, but price wasn't trading well, and we never had an entry model. So for me, bull bias coming down here, what I wanted to see price essentially do is actually come down here and sell into this Asia low on NQ. One of the pieces I had past my first initial piece that I posted on Discord, right, especially with this being here, engulf past, I expect NQ to run Asia lows, reverse, I expect for price to move back into range. So with this here specifically, what I mainly was saying here is that we had bullish SMT through ES and NQ, and for price to come down and wipe out that SMT tells you that price, potentially wants to trade lower. Now, Leto, why do you think NQ was going to hit Asia lows? Why not ES also hit Asia lows? Well, that's because NQ was actually leading the sell. And you could get a good gauge by that because you could look at exactly when price took out the low on London lows through NQ and then when ES did. And you could see that obviously clearly off the open, NQ ends up taking out the London low off the direct open. But ES does not end up taking out its London low all the way down until 10:10. So about 40 minutes after the open, we don't end up seeing ES act into its low until NQ sees a tremendous sell. What you could also see is when we did see the bearish SMT invalidation, or the bullish SMT invalidation, look at the New York lows that we had set in place. NQ ends up taking out its New York low, specifically right here, at around 10 o'clock sharp. ES does not end up taking out its New York low of day until 10, right here, until 10:06 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So ES does not trade past its New York low of day until 6 minutes after NQ did. So that's how you're able to get a gauge behind price and get a gauge behind which asset is stronger, which asset is the weaker sell. And you see price come down here and you see a tremendous sell through NQ. And all I pretty much said in this comp piece is I said, okay, we invalidated the bullish SMT. If we see price trade past London lows on ES, expect Asia lows, knowing that NQ was obviously the weaker asset. We eventually come down here and we see price take out Asia lows. This is still with me not having a major clear bias. Then we end up seeing price sweep the low, and recognizing that ES was the leading asset at this time, we actually ideally wanted to look for a potential long in play after seeing price flip back to being bullish into that bullish bias. We see price sell off tremendously, and we see NQ put in almost a perfect low by sweeping its Asia low almost to the tick and seeing a move back up. And recognizing the hourly time frame, the one thing you could get through the hourly time frame here is that you could see that the sentiment in terms of the market has been very range bound, right? Price has been very up and down. So for me, in my head, I said, okay, great sell here, but what's the probability we see continuation today on a Monday, right? Not that likely. The likelihood of us seeing a move back up and a trade back into range was likely. And so from there, with that recognition through sentiment on the hourly time frame, with this recognition through the Asia sweep off the low, what I wanted to see price do was simply flip back up here and violate the bearish sequence that we had back down, aka violating bearish PD arrays. We ended up seeing that happen, and with us recognizing earlier on that NQ was the weaker asset, we then wanted to go long on the leading asset, which was ES. And the first idea that I had in mind was a 5-minute gap, which went invert, that I wanted to see price come down and retrace into and retest that 5-minute gap alongside this 1-minute bullish gap. Wanted to see price come tap and see a beautiful confirmation sequence confirming back up and then heading higher. We unfortunately do not end up getting that trade because price just went off the get-go. The moment we inverted, we saw price just go higher and higher, but we stood poised and we stood chill. And eventually we had a second idea, which was the idea behind 2 5-minute gaps where we wanted to see price rebalance, again, being patient, and then going off there. We eventually ended up seeing price come down here, and we see price retest the gap. What do we eventually do? Confirm and end up taking the trade where we take entry at the confirmation sequence right here, being the closure back above the gap. We went break-even stops at this 5-minute gap CE, right at the midpoint, and then we simply let the trade go from there. But the unfortunate thing actually behind this take, right, when we took this trade on ES, was that ES and NQ had a divergence flip mid-trade. And you could see that based upon the fact that NQ, at that point in time, after initially bouncing back up, NQ was trading past the swing high and holding consistently. But if you look at ES here, you were seeing ES consistently not hold because we were trading underneath that swing high. So it was a bit frustrating. We eventually ended up going break-even stops, and this trade closes out for a break-even, which was a bit annoying because we had our bull bias, we had our components in, and had we simply taken on NQ, this trade would have panned out first try. From there, we sat still, and we simply waited for price to clear up again after initial consolidation. Then we eventually end up seeing a good second trade entry, which was the entry I showed you at the beginning of the review, which was a potential long in play. NQ hourly internal high still not taking. Right above, we have the CE of an hourly gap. That would be target, stop relative low. Idea is bullish gap, rebalance, confirm, and then jab long. If we come back down, violate the gap, create a 1-minute bearish gap, then come back up, then invert that creating a bullish IFEG. I like it even better. 1-minute bearish BPR invalidation. This is essentially what it was. So we had a bullish fair value gap, which I initially just looked for price to bounce off and see higher. We did not end up doing that. We instead come down here and we violate that gap, creating a bearish inversion alongside a bearish fair value gap. Now in my head, I was like, okay, this is somewhat bearish, but really, if we come back up and we see a violation of this 1-minute bearish gap and we see price reclaim above the gap, now we have these two gaps here, which were bearish gaps, a balanced price range in the same zone, get violated, right? I said that a lot today. And that's exactly what I was looking for. Stop relative low, closure above, violating that bearish BPR, which gives you bullish sentiment in price. Our target of interest for this trade was the hourly gap CE after our initial ultimate draw, which was the hourly internal high. We eventually say I am long, take it on live, and then we eventually see price build up nicely off this NQ position where I then go risk-free once high of day is taken out. TP1 interest eventually gets taken, where we see price get smashed for a 1.5R. From there, we simply trailed stops continuously, and we eventually get trailed out for this trade at about a 2.7R. This is our trailed stop right here, and we eventually get trailed out there right around here before the market close, where we then see price essentially just consolidate coming into the close. So what did we do today? We stood patient. We initially had a bull bias. We then saw a tremendous sell off the open, and we were confused. We didn't know what price wanted to do, but the most important thing is we stood still, stood patient. Then we saw price sweep overnight lows. We saw a beautiful move back up, recognizing the hourly time frame, recognizing the sweep of the low, bullish sentiment. We then saw price follow up on that by showcasing consistent displacement, violating this bearish sequence. And then we eventually get two trades. First one going break even due to the divergence flip between NQ and ES mid trade. And then we take the second trade on NQ, recognizing that NQ was the leading asset now, went long and saw a beautiful return on investment here for about a 2.7R, resulting in me in around $120,000 on the trading day. That's pretty much it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the review. Catch you guys in the next one.